For our first exercise, I want you to grab a pencil. I'm going to be using a mechanical pencil, but any type of pencil you have. I want you to use a softer one. So if you have a 2B or an HB pencil, what I want you to do is this. And I'm going to go ahead and use a 2B pencil just to start it off. So here's what I'm going to visualize. As I'm looking at my subject, which is this horse skull here, I'm going to want to see this. I have my paper. I want to visualize on my page how big. Is it going to be this big, my drawing? So like right here? Or is it going to be about this big? Well, do I want it to fit on my paper? Or am I going to start here and whoops, ran out of paper kind of thing, which has happened to all of us. What I want to do is pretty much visualize and look, and you can follow along right now. Find my east, north, west, and south points. Now, what am I doing here? I am looking and visualizing, is this point, if I go straight across from east to west, and I'm just going left to right. I don't want to confuse anyone. So I'm just going north, south, east, west, just to get a sense as if it were a map. But here, if I go from left to right, I'm looking to the point on my subject that would actually take me to what is the most outer point. And I see it right there. And they're marked by those little red lines. So notice that if I go from here straight across, this one's a little bit higher. And then the one here at the north, it's not right directly above, but just a little bit to the left of it. How high, how far? We're going to get a sense of it as we build this. And if I go straight down, I'm going to look at this one at the same time. And I know that it's below and it's a little bit left of that one as well. So I'm kind of getting these points. And all this is done very loosely. I immediately begin to get a sense of, it's a little too flat or it's a little too wide. So the idea why you want to do this is because this is stage one. You don't want to start your drawing by starting with detail and working your way. And by the time you get here, you go, oops, it's a little too big. Have to erase all that work and start over. What you want to do is like a construction. Start by the simplest and the biggest forms, and then move to generic, straight shapes. So if you begin to see here, I'm going to do very loosely angles. So I know that, for example, this line that I'm seeing here is about this long, and it's not vertical, it's not horizontal, it's about, I like to use the hands of the clock. So this was about like 12:30, not even 1 o'clock. And then I'm going to look for the other angle that takes me right here. But notice how loose and how light I want these lines to be, because they're just wireframes. They are going to be the key for me to develop little by little, stage by stage. And notice that they're very straight lines. I'm going to look at this line right here, but I want to really pay attention to just what is the angle and what is the length. Now, there are going to be some things that pop up, like if this connecting point, for example, this line and this line bends there, that would mark like a connecting point right here. Is that one matching something if I were to draw a straight line down with another point? So notice that this one's way further to the right. And you can begin to see, how this one is a little bit higher, should be a little bit lower, a little bit more left or right. As you begin to put all these lines together, this one's kind of pretty easy. Well, actually, this was supposed to be, and see, this is one of those where I could just erase, make an adjustment, and I have a feeling that this is way wider, longer here. Takes me all the way back as I look at these smaller lines and how they begin to come together. Because remember that first point I had up here? Look at this line right here, how it doesn't match right below it. It's a little bit to the right of it. So I'm going to end up with something like this to start off. And that looks so far so good. You should be able to begin to tell, am I somewhere near this or should I make adjustments? I'm going to make one adjustment because this to me seems a little bit too thin for the actual shape of this, or it's a little more curve. So as I make it a little bit thicker at the top and maybe a little bit longer here at the end, I begin to get a sense of the whole thing. Where would we go on from here? So our next step would be to begin to make these a little bit more complex. So this is one of the things I want you to remember today. If you walk away with anything to remember today is this. Start big, work your way to small. So from the biggest, which was this shape, to smaller, smaller, smallest. And just the same, from the simplest, it doesn't get any simpler than this, to more and more complex until it's really complex. So that's how you want to develop and build your drawings. Now, I'm going to begin to look for other clues and other shapes here. And here is where you don't want to get right into detail. You just want to maintain the level of looking for simplicity. And look, I'm not kind of going for just a general circular shape here. I'm going to look at this tip and I'm going to make sense of, okay, where would this actually make sense now? So I'm going to look for those smaller angles and really pay attention to, is it getting more horizontal or more vertical? So these lines, if it's getting too flat, push it up. As I push it up, I can make it, maybe look for relationships. So where this point meets, if I were to draw a straight line, is it right below, right at the middle, or underneath the lower part of this eye socket? So notice that that part right there kind of lines up perfect with if I were to draw that line. And I take this pretty much out. And I also look at how that begins to shape. So I'm going to look at some of these simpler curves, but resist the urge to try to make detail. Try to continue a little bit darker, but not too dark, not yet. Just one shade darker, not too heavy. A line that's right on top of the early one you just put there. So as I continue this, I keep looking at more and more refined shapes. And I'm going to look at some of these curves without losing myself into the detail just yet. Now, some of these forms can come in and out of some of those shapes we had there earlier. And I'm going to find my way. I'm going to find working my way around to whatever I see easiest. So some of us are better at seeing geometric shapes. Some of us are better at seeing relationships, meaning between one part and another. So at this point, you begin to work on what you begin to see easier. And the main thing, I'll keep saying that over and over, avoid the urge to begin to detail. And by that, you know what I mean. I mean getting too caught up and trying to really finish an area. And notice that I just went all the way across and kind of developed it to a second stage, call it a second or third stage. And once I'm there, I want to begin to look for even more clues. Like, what would be the easiest, simplest thing that I could do next that's going to get me even closer? So I think it would be something like this. So now I'm going to begin to look at some of these big lines inside, and I'm going to take a couple of points like a GPS. So I want to go from here. I know it starts here, and it goes like this, and it ends here. Sometimes that's very helpful. So notice that there's a little space between here and here, and I might just go, okay, so it ends here. And then I could just kind of develop that shape easier if I know where I'm headed, where I'm going. And I'm just, again, simplifying until I get And I could stop, check it, see, I don't think it's that curve up here. So I'm going to make an adjustment. This is where you draw with your eraser, if at all, to make those adjustments. And it looks a little bit flatter. I also want to look at how thick this looks here and how it gets thinner over here. And then there's a little peak and then another little curvature that gets thinner right towards the front. So until I get simple shapes looking a little bit closer than what I would then be guessing, we don't want to move past that. We just want to stay there and begin to see little by little how this line just takes me kind of right here towards the middle. A little bit, developing somewhat of a new shape if you were to take this together with the eye. And then some of these, no detail, just next curves. And how they come together. How here we have that same shape going, but upwards. And here's those famous horse teeth right there. And I'll develop, I'm just giving myself a little clue there so I know what's going to happen. And there's little details here and there. You don't want to get caught up in them just yet. So this line, I don't want to get too confused with, oh, whoosh, I lost my place. What was this line? Which one was this one? I want to make sure I have clear clues for later on so I know what's going to happen. But notice that already is like, ooh, we started very simple shapes, very loose lines, and little by little, it's like building a house. First, it's really messy, muddy, cement-like wires and barbed wire, and not barbed wire, but rebar and iron and stone. And little by little, you begin to see, oh, look, there's floors, and that looks kind of like a wall. And until you put the finishing touches, you can then paint and decorate. But we don't want to be doing any decorating on a construction site yet. You want to develop it. And I'm going to begin to erase some of these lines from the earlier stage 1, stage 2, so they don't get too confusing. Some of these lines that I don't want to, and I'm not going to be a part of the drawing. They were just there. And because I was making them so loose and carefree, they could kind of begin to confuse you. So you should know every step of the way, what is my next, what should be my next move. So from here, I am going to let you guys, work in your magic. And now, as I have a good structure that I feel comfortable with, I might say, okay, now I see this. That's going to get, like we said, from bigger to smaller to smallest. I begin to see smaller curves, smaller little bone shapes here that come around across. Oh, I see how this connects up here and gives me that beautiful eye socket that we're now, when we look at a horse, not its skull, we're going to understand why horses, especially when they have that, profile or full or frontal shape, point of perspective, we're going to understand it way better. I'm beginning to add just a few extra lines, and notice that they get smaller and smaller and a little more precise. So not detailed yet. Again, I myself would call some of this detail because I'm totally fine with leaving it like that. It's enough to give me the look that I want. It says pretty much everything I want it to, and I read it as, oh yeah, that's the shape I wanted, and it's horse, totally. A couple of nice curves right here as you get closer to the front. And nice. This is going to be key here for me. At least I want to make sure I pay a little attention to it. And again, it's simple lines with nice, precise curves that give you pretty much a finishing look without having to force or add your detail to it. I'm going to look at what seems to be a canine right here. And how am I going to develop some of these curves and shadow areas? So I see something back there, which is the backside of the mouth. So I'm just going to make it a little bit, just like I did here, with a little bit of shade. As I work my way all the way down here as well. I don't want to get too caught up in any detail until the very, very end. Otherwise, you lose your sense of putting together the whole of it. And by the whole, I mean as you're looking at the entire thing. Because when we start doing detail, most of the time, we just focus on one little area. And we forget about how that and everything else relate to each other. I think this one is important for me. This shape right here, as we get that jaw. And what more does say horse than a strong jaw? And it gives it a lot of personality. And now this first line that we did here earlier, I see little areas that get smaller. And notice how it's also getting darker. My line is getting, as it gets more precise, it gets a little darker. But you could still be giving yourself some clues as you work your way through this. How to begin to add texture, maybe, with some softer lines that then have bone folding, kind of, I'm going to say, within the bone, just the shaping of it. And here I go with some of the shading that I'm going to do in the eye. So I'm just going to add a little bit of graphite to half of it. And it gets a little darker here at the top. And I hope some of you have this, which I asked for you to bring, which is there. I didn't have it ready. Sorry about that. Paper blenders. And they look like this. They're little rolls of paper. Tortillos, they call them. They're all kinds of different shapes and sizes. You might want to be working with one that's not too big or too small for your drawing. So I have this tiny little one and I have this big thick one. So you want to probably have one in between. Otherwise, you're going to be working with the different type of rendering that you want on this area here. So as I added some graphite here in the eye, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just blend it into the paper by rubbing this as if I were using my finger. But this is getting in between my finger and the paper. I don't touch the paper with my finger. And you don't want to blend with your fingers because you pretty much add oils that are on your finger to the paper. And when they mix with the graphite, it doesn't give you a really good look. And once you do it, it's there. So I'm just adding a little extra graphite on the outside of just to give it a little stylistic look. Like a background, if you notice. Just a little edge to the top of it. And here, inside the eye socket, as I made it darker, I could also draw with my eraser. So I could just tap some lines of eraser, making it a little lighter. You could also use, if you have it, a kneaded eraser. And those are these where you could squeeze and shape and stretch. If you don't have one, that's fine. But it's also a good technique, a good tool for doing this type of shading and lifting graphite when drawing. And you can continue using it in layers. Okay, so let me continue here. Oh, here's what I wanted to show you. So I'm going to go with this paper blender, placing it in my finger, and I'm going to add that graphite, and I'm just going to begin to, what I feel like is as if I was just rubbing this right on the thing I'm drawing. So notice that if I were to rub this on the table, well, it's just flat. Let's say I had a ball, it would curve as I rub it on it. So here, as I look at my shape, I want to make sense of, is it going under, over, in, out? And you kind of want to mimic the direction and the shape of the thing you're blending. So notice that there's roundness. I don't want to go just up and down flat. I want to make sure I curve the blending, especially here. So I could kind of, it literally feels like you were tracing or just rubbing this paper blender on top of your actual subject. And following the direction of it with patience as you pay close attention to what the direction of that shadow, in this case, falls on the actual form. Perfect. And just little by little, we begin to focus on more and more specific areas. And we want to add a little darker. So here's where I use another technique, which is my absolute favorite go-to technique. And it's squinting as hard as I can, right through my eyelashes almost. As I look at this skull, I squint really, really hard. Like really right through my eyelashes. And the thing that I want to see is, what's the darkest part? What are the darkest parts? And what are the lightest parts? And immediately I get this area here. I hope you guys could see it. It gets really dark right here. It actually gets really dark right here too. And obviously right here. So I'm just going to add more graphite to this area. And I'm going to add some graphite outside of it as I begin to finish my drawing. And we're pretty close to finished. Because I'm going to bring now my bigger, thicker paper blender. And I'm going to blend this outside very carefully. Now this one, because it's flat and it's just background, I could do whatever I want. You know, it's flat. I could circle it just to create a little atmosphere. So it's a great opportunity to test your different techniques of blending graphite. So notice that once I begin to add a little bit of that to the background, it almost begins, it starts looking like we place it in space, basically. So we now begin to see it and obviously in the photograph it's just a black background. But if we had, say, a table or a different surface, you would want to play with that as well. There's another little area here, right here, where it gets really just a little dark right there. And that's where the beginning of these teeth is going to come next as I work my way into it. And just in this area of the folds. Notice that I didn't put too much attention to this area over here. And yeah, again, there's a lot of bone and little detail. You could save that. I would definitely save all of that for last because there's a lot of it. And it's to the characteristics and the major features of this drawing, it's not the most important thing. And you could literally just put some lines, some value, meaning lights and darks, and resolve that very, very easily. So here I'm just going to come in where I see this line. And again, it's also how I decide to put this. And I'm just going to add a few lines. Notice I'm squinting again to see those lights and darks, where some of these lines have a little bit of shadow. And I'm following the pattern. I'm not really counting. I'm trying to keep my pace. So I'm really looking at the photo, the image, my reference photo, more than I'm looking at my paper. So I don't lose my place. And as I draw these little specks of graphite on there, I'm going to go back to my small paper blender, and I'm going to look for, hopefully, just the right blend. Now, blending, there's a really important thing called pressure. The softer you try to blend, the better results you're going to have. So think in terms of, let's say, pounds of pressure. So if your fingernails is getting white when you, like here, like right now, and it feels like you're almost about to rip the paper, that's too, a little softer. And there's another way where almost so soft, it's the actual weight of that little paper blender. You're not adding any pressure at all. And that's how you have to do it sometimes. In between all of those ranges, you have a way of measuring how hard, how much pressure am I putting on this poor little paper blender. And also how hard I'm rubbing the paper, because you can hurt it. Some of the textures of the paper. Wow, this is actually looking pretty good. And now, some of these final touches, I'm going to really make sure my pencil's really sharp. And I'm going to add some of these nice little cracks here that I see. Very, very light. I want to make sure they're cracky and jiggly and have that nice sense of super, super fine line as they follow the right direction and the contour of some of these shapes. And I see one right here as well. And one right here. And I give them just a little final pass of shading right through the middle, right and right here. And there we have it. What else would I do to this now? The only thing I would want to add to this, there's a little more shading I could do down here. A little more volume so you could see the curving of the skull and some of the flatter areas that also have a little light or shadow in them. But overall, I think this looks done. The only real thing that I would do extra would be to work on a more consistent background. So adding a little graphite, definitely in here. And allowing myself to work it in with some, you can actually see the pencil line. And then just blending some of it in. And I don't mind actually seeing the pencil lines through some of this, call it texture. And there we have it.